and welcome back to Getting to the Top, where we interview transformational leaders about their leadership journey. And typically, we interview women who have been quite advanced in their careers and have been working for decades and decades. Today, we have a little bit of an exception, and I'll tell you why. This woman's meteoric rise in legal has been nothing short of phenomenal, and I think it is a story that we need to hear. It inspires me when I hear about what she does and how she works and how passionate she is. And I know that this is a story that will inspire you. And I'm not just saying that because she's my friend. Rachel Welch-Phillips is an attorney at law of the courts of Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada. She's a solicitor of the courts of England and Wales. She's lived in Venezuela, Brazil, the USA, and UK, and is truly a cultural chameleon and an avid traveler. She's trained at an international law firm in London and returned to Trinidad with one of the largest law firms in the world. And within a year, she was made partner and regional department head. Her career then moved in-house, where she currently sits on the senior executive team of one of the incredibly esteemed organizations in the region, head of the legal and compliance in the banking sector of ANSA McAL Group. She's a passionate advocate for youth and female empowerment in executive teams, but she's also an incredible person on sustainability and all things climate. Welcome, Rachel Welch-Phillips.
Wow. Thank you, Racquel. I hope I can live up to the excitement of that intro.
Absolutely. You are that plus more. So let's talk about where it started. And it's funny, right? As much as I've known Rachel and we've gotten together and talked several times, I didn't hear about like what her school life was like and how what that was like until like this weekend, which was really funny. It wasn't actually funny, but it was funny that it was the first time that I was hearing about it. And two, it was quite unexpected. Like, when you hear Rachel on a platform, she is poised, she is together, she's well informed, she is prepared, she has tons of information. And I'm hoping to continue to learn about ESG and sustainability from her, even though that's not even her primary function. It's legal and compliance. So to learn that this was a challenging experience and that she had to overcome barriers in school was really quite the surprise. So we're going to start with school. Take us a little bit through a memory lane about school and what that was like for you. And then take us to the point of where you figured out you wanted to be an attorney.
Sure. Thanks, Racquel. So look, I'm the daughter of a diplomat, right? And anybody who comes from a family of expats will know movement and change is the norm. You don't really know where you're going, how long you're going to stay, or how long it will last. And as a product of the international school system, your life is quite turbulent. People come and people go. Every year, your class looks different. So that was the environment I was thrown into when I was 8 years old. It came with many, many, many benefits in terms of the quality of education and the cultural exposures I had. But the real challenges of that were you were taking a young Black girl with Black characteristics who speaks English with a Trinidadian accent and planting her in a society where, even though it's so close, Caracas, Venezuela is not far from Trinidad, it is just so completely different. And I was put into the British Academy, the British School of Caracas, when I was 8 years old. And I was the only Black person in my class. And as anybody with children knows, children are really wired to notice difference. And difference gets noticed in a way that sometimes is not very pleasant. So I experienced quite a bit of bullying growing up because I sounded so different, because I looked so different. Everything from my poofy afro hair to how funny my English sounded when I spoke it, because everyone was so accustomed to a very English accent at school. I struggled. I struggled to make friends. I struggled to fit in, but it also forced me to learn very, very quickly. So within a year, I had verbal conversational Spanish. I could fool people with my accent. I learned to adapt my English accent to sound less Trinidadian, depending on who I was speaking to. And those experiences really developed in me a resilience and a strength to adapt, and I feel like anywhere I go now, I can pull off a semblance of belonging, whether or not I really feel like I belong.
And I think that's beautiful because, when people see you, you don't know the back history, right? And you are beautiful by anybody's standards. So to think that you felt different and could have been bullied for looking different was really, really quite a surprise. And so you learned how to adapt. So take me now to how did you decide, you know what? Well, when did you decide? What did you think you were going to be back in Caracas? What did you think you were going to do?
Well, my father's always told me I was going to be a lawyer, always, since I was a little girl. In fact, he used to hold court in the house and make my brother and I advocate for ourselves in a court of law where he was the judge. And he kept telling us we had to bring a case if we wanted anything to change, or if we wanted anything to be different. So I think there was a lot of sort of in the back of my mind, this was always a possibility. But as a true defiant teenager, I, of course, wasn't going to just jump into whatever career my father had hand selected for me. So the reality is, I've always been a very passionate environmentalist, not in a corporate sense, but truly in a I love nature and animals sense. I always grew up with dogs. My father owned a pet store when I was little. Like there was just a lot of exposure to animals that always created in me a love and appreciation for the environment. And I used to be very vocally passionate about anything I saw that was harming it. And my teachers at the international school that I was at in Caracas, which I went to after the British Academy, they noticed that. And so they got me involved in a lot of environmentally related initiatives at the school. And then again, being an international school, they exposed me to my educational opportunities in the United States that would allow me to pursue an environmental career. So that's what I ended up doing. I got a full scholarship to Middlebury College in Vermont, which is one of the strongest liberal arts colleges that teaches environmental studies. So that is where I really fortified my passions and my advocacy in the space of sustainability.
So it seems as though, despite the fact that you had sort of challenges around classmates and bullying, the teachers at least saw in you this innate talent. And then your father decided. So is your brother an attorney as well?
No, he's not. My brother's actually a development banker, so he works for the
Okay.
World Bank. But the reality is, look, what my father instilled in all of us is a sense of really hard work, right?
Hmm.
You have to work hard to get anywhere. You have to work hard at your schoolwork. You have to always be academic, regardless of all the other pursuits like environment or sport you wanted to do alongside. So I'm still a child of a very Caribbean household. So what the teachers took note of was that I was very disciplined. I
Nice.
never missed deadlines. I always completed work, and I was always top of the class.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what's interesting, I was actually friends with Rachel's father before I met Rachel, and he is as excellent as he is so much fun. He is so much fun.
He is,
I
he is.
wouldn't imagine him to be the disciplinarian as a parent because he's such a fun person.
Oh, he is. He is.
Well, you don't end up with head of legal compliance for ANSA and World Bank by accident. That's not how that works.
This is true. And credit where credit is due. We had a very supportive household growing up. And that's, again, one of the things that counterbalanced some of what my school experiences were, is I had a home that was incredibly loving. I lacked for nothing. And I had parents who were extremely involved in every facet of my life, providing love and support every step of the way. And they kept me focused on what was important. They guided me with the this too shall pass principle, and kept me focused that there was a lot of life still to be lived.
But you would also have been at that age, right? Interacting with people from everywhere. So you would have had such a scope of exposure that most kids aren't exposed to. You would have had, views on global politics and, what was happening in the environment from a policy perspective as a child.
Absolutely. And also, the international school system had a lot of quite young and engaged and passionate teachers, right? I remember having teachers who were in their late 20s, early 30s, who were themselves avid travelers. They'd traveled from international school to international school all over the world.
Oh,
So the
wow.
nature of the education that was given to us was always very global as well in its exposure, and very current. Part of my homework always involved, you had to get online, dial up internet at the time, but you had to get online and read BBC News, right? And
Nice.
then you had to come in ready to discuss a matter of current affairs. There was always a lot of connectivity, and granted, in the classroom, all continents were represented in every classroom. I have friends on every corner of the globe now. And the cultural exposure that gives you as a child is it just breeds a lot of tolerance. And again, one of the core values of all the work that I do, whether it's diversity and inclusion work, whether it's sustainability work, it all boils down to this idea that injustice is really a lack of empathy, right? It's a lack of an ability to understand the other, and therefore resulting in actions that harm each other or harm the environment or harm nature. So there really is this understanding that I've always had ingrained in me, is that there's always another perspective. Yours isn't more important than anybody else's, and you have to listen. And I think really the international school system is a great place to teach a child that. So they just carry it through their whole lives. It's very hard to undo what was nurtured in your childhood. And I really thank that system for that in me, because I think everywhere I go, I have this value system that's embedded in empathy.
Yeah, no, I think that's so, so important. So, and then what was Vermont like? You might have been a bit of an outlier there as well, right?
Hugely, yes. So what is a sort of 95 or more % white state? I actually sat in a bit of a bubble. So the university I went to, Middlebury College, attracted a lot of international students to its campus. So really and truly, there was a lot of diversity on campus. If you stepped off campus, not so much. But Vermont was a very welcoming, very beautiful, very warm environment. And, the reality is, there's the context of the United States to face as well. When I get to a place like Vermont and I interact with students from all over the country, predominantly American students, they're not really sure what to do with me, right? Because Caribbean history of Blackness is very different to American history of Blackness. Not to mention things like, our emancipation, our civil rights movements, etc., long predated that of the United States. And so there's a rawness and a realness to the Black empowerment and the Black struggle in America that I simply couldn't relate to. It wasn't my reality. It wasn't my truth. But yet you set foot there and everyone expects it to be, because you look like that is your community. You look like that's where you belong. So the expectation is that you advocate, right? The expectation is that you join the struggle, right? And as much as I don't see that as problematic, I didn't understand the struggle, right? It wasn't something that I had been raised in. And again, I experienced a bit of I was ostracized a bit as well because of that lack of knowledge and ability to incorporate myself into that community, because the Black community there was predominantly African American. Right? Caribbean was a tiny minority. I think it was like 5 of us on the campus. And a lot of them were actually New York raised, but they have parentage in the Caribbean, so they understood the heritage. But off the boat West Indians were few and far between.
Okay. And so you're now, at least you're not a racial activist, but you're an environmental activist in the school in Vermont. And then you are now getting ready to graduate, and you decide, okay, what am I going to do next?
Yeah, so there's that decision that every undergrad has to make. Am I going to pursue further education, or am I going to jump into the world of work? And I think the reality, again, I was in the US on a very limited student visa. There was a real paperwork headache involved in staying in America, whether it was for more studies or more work. But I'm fortunate that I am born of an English mother, so I have English passport. And so I thought, you know what, let me hop over the pond and see what's going on there. So I applied to a few universities to do a master's in environmental policy. I got into the University of Cambridge, and I went straight over to the UK to continue that academic pursuit. And then following which I joined the energy industry as an environmentalist.
All right. And just, her mother is English, Trini, and I know she looks racially ambiguous. Both of her parents are people of color. So
That's
just
right.
wanna share that, because I think, the experience can be different, right? It can be different if you're mixed race, or if both of your parents are people of color, and the experience that you have coming up. But I like the fact that your parents were loving and sheltering, but allowed you to experience the experience. They didn't pull you out and say, well, let's homeschool you so that you don't have to deal with life struggles. Because I think that's how you build your own personal resilience, right? You had some hard knocks and you just had to learn, listen, home is home, and this is where I get my coverage and my cocoon. But when I go out into the real world, I actually have to I have to show up in a particular way that I at least have supported teachers, and the chips fall where they may with my classmates.
That's right. And in fact, even having gone through all of that, look, when we were in Venezuela, landed in the year Hugo Chavez took over, right? So it was a very tumultuous period in Venezuela's history, and it was known to be the start of the socialist revolution in the country. So the following years were very, very challenging years in that country for many, many reasons, and it resulted in diplomats not wanting to be there. My family were really happy there. We didn't want to leave. So my father kept getting extended. What was supposed to be 3 years became 6 years, became 9 years. But after 9 years, he got brought back to Trinidad. I, however, had just finished my lower 6th year, and I still had my upper 6th year. So 11th grade was what I finished. And I still had 12th grade to finish before I completed high school. And there was a choice that my family had to make. Do we let Rachel stay in Venezuela, complete the highly prestigious international baccalaureate program that she had just started and had done 1 year of, and allow her that opportunity to platform off of that international school system? Or do we bring her back to Trinidad where she can still live sheltered in our home, and we have to force her to repeat a year to join the Caribbean system known as CAPE? And that was a decision my parents allowed me to make myself. And I chose to stay in Venezuela on my own. So from age 16, I've been on my own. I've been very fiercely independent. I stayed in Venezuela for 1 extra year. My brother had gone off to university in the States already. My parents were back in Trinidad. So they were never far away, but I was faring on my own. And they only did that because they knew I could do it. And they knew I wanted to do it. And they knew my determination. And I managed to complete my 12th grade year, valedictorian of the class, full scholarship to university, and off I went.
So you lived alone at 16?
Essentially, I sort of roommated at first with a family, and then after that, I moved out on my own, and then I lived with a teacher for a little while. But I was pretty fiercely independent at that point. It didn't really bother me where I laid my head. I was determined that I was not going to allow the year to waste, and I had goals to achieve, and I achieved them.
All right. All right. So now you're leaving undergrad, and you've gone to Cambridge. So what is that experience like?
Cambridge was amazing. So I was in Cambridge as a postgrad, right? Which is a very different experience from being at Cambridge as an undergrad, starting with the fact that there's a far more international presence, right? So I think my master's program had maybe 2 or 3 British people on it. Everyone else was from everywhere else. I was very accustomed to that, right? Having gone to international schools my whole life, I knew how that felt, I knew how that looked, and I knew how to take best advantage of it. So again, I have friends from all corners of the globe that were in my master's program with me. And again, I was pursuing the same subject matter areas I had pursued in undergrad, just at a higher level. And so I was very, very comfortable, and I was very determined. And that was my first introduction to law. So I had an environmental law course that I took at Cambridge, and I absolutely adored it. I had a great relationship with my professor. She encouraged me to do a legal and environmental law dissertation, which I did. And then she helped guide me through the path to what it would look like to become a lawyer in the UK. I didn't do it straight away, but I kept it at the back of my mind. Again, someone else in my life telling me, you should be a lawyer. You'd be good at that. You should do it. So I held on to that. So even though I joined the energy industry for a couple of years after that as an environmentalist, I decided to do a law degree part-time while I worked. So I did my LLB out of London as a part-time student while I worked full-time in energy.
I love that, because so many people feel like, it needs to be all or nothing, right? You either have to quit and you have to stop working. And so many of us do school, but you have to feed yourself. You have to take care of yourself. You work and you get through it. It's never a time.
It's really, really hard. I'm not going to lie. It is not easy. Would I recommend it to a friend? Sure, if you are really determined and you know that you're getting yourself into something that is really going to drain you. But, I worked as a paralegal for the second half of my law degree. So I left energy after I had completed my first year of my LLB, and I joined an engineering firm as a paralegal. And it was a lot of work. It was long, long work days. And I would go to work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then I would come home and be able to throw some food back for about 15 minutes before I jumped onto my online classes from 6 p.m. And then those went on until 10 p.m. And then I would do my reading for the next day between 10 p.m. and midnight before dropping to sleep and waking up to start my day again. I did this for 2 years, and it took its toll. It really took its toll on my life. There were many, many sacrifices that had to be made for that to get done. But again, I knew what I wanted to achieve. I knew it was finite in time. The sacrifice was, that is, and I had a wonderful support system. My boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was a huge support to me then. And again, my parents always having my back. So it was really hard. I mean, I think that's probably the time in my life that I would say, was probably my biggest struggle, where I question myself a lot. Is this the right thing to be doing? Should I be doing this? Does this make sense? Is there any need to rush this thing? But I honestly couldn't afford the law degree without the job. So I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. I had to finance my way into my new career. I was so fiercely independent. I refused to ask for my parents' money. And so I thought, this is the only way. So I'm just going to have to do it.
Yeah, no, I don't look back at that time in my life with a lot of like, everything else I can romanticize, but working and going to school full time, I remember that as like, like there were a lot of tears. Like I
Oh,
cried
yes.
a lot. I was just like, why am I doing this? I feel like I'm fraying at the seams. I'm not gonna make
Yeah.
it. And yeah, and I remember when I finally graduated, like my best friend, I was like, I'm not even going to the graduation ceremony. I couldn't care less. I just want to be done. And my
Done.
girlfriend was like, after all you went through, oh, she's like, you may not go. I'm going.
I'm
And
going. I'm going. Yeah, you have to
and
celebrate
she
those
got me,
wins.
yeah, she got me to go. And now I have all of these pictures from graduation. And I was like, oh, I'm really glad that I did go. But it's just like it felt like being run over by a truck repeatedly.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's
But
it.
but
And
it's
do I
like,
regret having done it? No, but it was a torturous time.
yeah, and but like you said, it's a finite time, right? And
That's
I
it.
tell people all the time the best advice I got was at the time, because I also had a small child at the time. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so hard to be away from her and whatever else. And my aunt said, no matter what you do at that time is gonna pass. So you might as well do something meaningful that makes a difference in your life. And that was, honest to God, the best advice I've ever received, because my life would be so completely different if I didn't spend that time and go through that slug and, get that second degree.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Absolutely. So it's nothing to regret, but I do, people who ask me about it and say, oh, I'm thinking about this. I'm like, think about it hard, because there's a lot
Yeah.
of context, right? At the time, I had no children, I had no mortgage, I had no, I was able to really just be laser focused on that and not really make life-changing sacrifices that I was unsupported in making, right?
Yeah.
So I think context is really key when making those decisions, and it shouldn't be a universal truth that sort of this is suitable for everyone.
Yeah. No, but I also think that we sometimes underestimate what we're capable of, because, times like that, they're hard, but then you get through it. And then on the other side, you're so much better off for having done it. And even if you have to
Yep.
say, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I may not finish now, but I'll finish eventually, or, just sort of decide to manage how you manage
Yeah.
without feeling like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to a human being in the history of the earth.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. The dramatics don't help, but you do have dramatic moments. You can't help it. It's very
Oh my
emotional.
God.
But
No,
yes,
I
I
cried a
completely
lot.
agree.
Cried a lot.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
fainted at work. I fainted at work because I
Oh
was
my
so
God.
overexhausted. I hadn't been sleeping well or eating well, trying to do everything at the same time. And I walked into a town hall meeting that the company was having, the engineering
No,
company was having, that I was paralegaling
no.
at. And I leaned against a piece of furniture. And then all of a sudden, I just started seeing bright colored spots. And I knew I was going to pass out. So I mouthed to one of the secretaries across the room. I said, I'm going to faint. She ran over and caught me before my head hit the floor.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was my moment of, wow, you're doing a lot. It is taking its toll. Be a little more diligent about things like eating on time, sleeping
Yeah,
enough. If you don't read all the readings, you read three-quarters of them, that's good enough if it means you get a better sleep. Those types of
yeah,
decisions I started to make a lot better. But it wasn't all, rosy and peachy. Sometimes I feel like my story can be easily romanticized. But there
yeah,
were so many times when I felt to give up, and there were so many moments where I had very physical manifestations of the stress I was putting myself through. So as determined as my mind was, my body was giving way, and I had
yeah,
to recognize that and honor that and care for that in the same way as I cared for my mental determination.
And so good, right? Because that's the thing that people see where you are and they think, oh my God, she's a swan. It must have been a coast, and it was anything but a coast.
Exactly. And I think the next stage in my career really showed that, because when I finished that law degree, the next step in the UK is you have to get something called a training contract, which is where you spend 2 years at a law firm. You're not yet a qualified lawyer, right? You've just completed a law degree. You have to do 2 years where you check all the boxes of the areas of law you have to be exposed to. And only after that, you get called to the bar. Now, those 2 years are known to be the most brutal years of your career, because you're at the bottom of the barrel of the hierarchy in law, and law being a strenuous environment already, you get the brunt of it, you know? So there were many, many nights where I would sleep under my desk and be taking 2-hour naps in between completions, or, you know, completing deals on a Saturday morning at 3 a.m., or, you know, just really pushing myself. And a lot of the times, especially coming back to a culture where you don't have that, you know, New York and London are known for being very stressful environments from a law firm standpoint. You come back to a culture where that's not the case. People make assumptions about what your career journey has been to date, and assumptions of, you know, you've got to the top so fast. How did you do that? Well, you know, there's a disconnect between what it takes to become a lawyer and make a mark in some of these big city dog-eat-dog, highly competitive environments. And so what that gives you is real grit. And the learning curve is so steep, so incredibly steep. By the time you finish that training contract, you can run deals on your own, right? And you're talking multi-million-dollar deals, several juggling at a time. You know, every 6 weeks, you get fresh ones in. You know, very accelerated pace of learning. And that's what I credit to how I've been able to make my mark today, is that, you know, I was put through the ringer and I survived it. when you survive the ringer, you often come out being able to do things that make you feel a bit like a superhero.
Love it. So then the training contract. So what happens at the end of the training contract?
So I got offered a full-time position at the law firm. I became a
Nice.
finance lawyer at the firm in London, and I stayed there practicing law for 6 years, doing mostly asset finance, project finance type work.
Okay. So then was this
Then,
then the big
the big C. So basically, I was on maternity leave at the time. I had my daughter in September of 2019, and in the UK, you get sort of a 12-month maternity period with job security and statutory maternity pay and all of that. So I was on, my daughter was only 6 months old when COVID lockdowns began. And my husband is Trinidadian, I'm Trinidadian. Our parents both live here in Trinidad and have ample space and gardens and so on. And we sat in our little shoebox of an apartment in London looking at each other thinking, we don't want to be locked down here. So we jumped on one of the last flights British Airways was offering from London to Trinidad. And we came back home thinking it was just for a couple of months. We came down with basically one suitcase, mostly my daughter's things, to be honest. And, you know, we thought, okay, let's sort of lock down at home. Once this thing dies, we'll fly back. And of course, as we know, that didn't happen. So I worked remotely for my London law firm for 2 years. They were very good during that period, allowing people to work from wherever they were. So I continued practicing finance law in London, technically, from Trinidad. And then around end of 2021, they were sort of saying, well, we're opening back up soon. Are you coming back? And by then I had created such an incredible life for my now children. I had another son during COVID, that, you know, it just wasn't an option to leave. So I quit and I looked to the job market here, and that's where I landed at another international law firm that had a presence in Trinidad.
Beautiful. And then you came in guns blazing at that law firm, you know, making a name for yourself, seeing you everywhere and doing everything. And then that landed you just the visibility to your current position.
Yeah, so I think the reality is I had always dreamed of landing in-house. In-house meaning within a business, practicing law within a business rather than within a law firm environment. The reason for that is that I feel like my mind is more geared to more commercial and strategy type propositions than exclusively law. And as an external lawyer, you get sort of discrete instructions as to what your role is from a legal standpoint. It's quite limited in that regard. Whereas I always wanted the ability to have more flexibility to add, both legal value, but also the commercial value that can be added from the legal value. The international law firm I was with was a fantastic experience. Ever since I went to Cambridge, sustainability has come with me. So even when I was at the law firm in London, practicing finance law, I was also advising on sustainability matters, helping, companies and clients with their carbon emissions monitoring and verification, their reporting, understanding what ESG is, what it's not, helping them understand the regulatory landscape that was rapidly emerging in Europe at that time, and helping mostly banks understand it and wrap their minds around it. So coming back to Trinidad, I just thought, okay, where can I do that here? And I realized there was a really unique opportunity because no law firms were doing it yet. So I thought, okay, great. This is my USP, right? This is my unique selling point. No one in this market knows me. I've never practiced law here before. I can just recreate myself. What an incredible opportunity that, that I get to have here. Let's make the most of it. And so that's what I did.
So there's an experience that I'm aware of that I know you will have to be cagey in describing, but I loved how through a volunteer effort, you created a space for a new transaction for the firm. And again, don't name any players, don't name any countries, but what I loved about this was that you took a chance on you to do something that turned into something incredible for the firm, even in the face of pushback, right? And sometimes that is knowing yourself, sometimes that is self-confidence. But tell me a little bit about that experience as, as much as you can, considering,
Yeah, sure. I think, we can stay really abstract with this. But, the reality is where value is added in a workplace is where someone can see things that other people can't see, right? This is the diversity play. This is the importance of having diverse boards and diverse decision-making environments, is that you want people to come to the table with things other people can't see or understand fully and introduce that new perspective. That's what I was doing in this particular matter. So I saw the opportunity for us to provide pro bono legal services on a transaction that I knew was going to be explosive. Now, I knew that because I was a subject matter expert on what the underlying project was about. So it wasn't just about the legal work. The legal work was contract work. You can push contract work without, really having a full understanding of the bigger picture implications and still do it right, But this wasn't the case. I fully grasped the big picture implications. I understood what it could do for the firm to be involved in something like this. So I pushed really, really hard to say, we need to do this. I know we're not going to receive immediate profit for doing this, but we need to do this. And I guarantee you, I will make it worth our while. And so again, all credit to him, my chairman was open and he said, look, this is why we bring people like you in, go blaze the trail and let me see what you can do. And I did it. And what that did was exactly what I thought it would do. It created this huge marketing buzz that the firm was able to take advantage of. And that then led to other clients knocking on our door to actually pay us for that service, right? And again, there's a lot of, I think one of the best forms of marketing is showing people what you can do. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to go and give their services out free of charge. I know that's not feasible, but there is a really strong argument for, look, a lot of firms have marketing budgets. That's a monetary spend that you're willing to put out. Then why not give me the equivalent of a marketing budget, but in my time that you would otherwise bill for, right? But let me use that time to show people what we are capable of doing and introduce something new that they're probably unsure how to value yet. But let me show them how, and that's what that experience was all about. And honestly, it was one of the career highlights for me of my whole career.
I loved that. And I think it's so brilliant to, be confident enough to bring in that perspective and to say, listen, let's take a chance. But it's also the kind of thing that many of us need to do, right? In our careers, you see things on the ground when you're working and you're like, we should get involved in this. And then you're like, you're either too scared to bring it up or you bring it up and somebody pushes back and you cave. But the thing is, trust that sense in your gut that this could really be something and be willing to look at things differently. I remember when I was head of InvestTT, we had way less money than people thought. And so, but what we did have was a discount at a particular hotel. And so people would come to us all the time to sponsor their event. And obviously we needed the brand recognition. We needed people to know, more people to know about what we were doing. So we would sponsor events by just using the discount that we had at the hotel. We're like, we pay for the hotel and you have the event there and we're a sponsor of the event. Sometimes all we offered was the difference in the price, right? That was the whole of our sponsorship. But it allowed us to get into so many more rooms as sponsoring these events. But you have to do the best that you can. You cannot ever throw up your hands and say, well, there is nothing that we can do based on the position that we're in. There is always something that you can do. And diversity is really the way to unlock that potential.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's a lot of courage that's needed in perceiving your differences as strengths, because society tends to create an illusion that you need to normalize yourself. What does normal mean? Normal means you fit in with the majority, right? Because what's normal otherwise? So normal is be average, right? And I think what I learned at a very young age is that I wasn't able to be normal, right? I couldn't change the color of my skin. I couldn't change my hair. I couldn't, I was who I was. And I decided, look, how do I make a strength out of this? So in the early days when, I was being bullied at school and so on, I realized actually, part of my ethnic difference is that I'm actually bigger and taller than a lot of y'all. And I'm also a lot stronger. So I started playing basketball and doing really, really well. I started joining sports and doing really, really well, and started being able to gain the respect of my peers through the things that made me different, that then became strengths of mine, And I think sometimes it takes a moment of really intense introspection to understand, how much of myself am I suppressing in an effort to normalize my behavior or my perspectives? And how much more could I be achieving if I didn't do that? If I didn't expend all that energy trying to fit in, and I instead accepted what my differences were and deployed them as strengths, what could that bring to the table? And I think what happened at that experience that I just described about this pro bono matter that we dealt with was that I did my homework. I wasn't going on a gut feeling or on a whim. I did my homework. And sometimes all that's needed in order to make your differences a strength is really do your homework on the proposition behind your difference in thinking, right? And you have to be able to sell it, right? So being a convincing seller of difference, that if you really want to accelerate it to the top, I think that's probably one of the biggest tips that I have.
Beautiful. And so let's close with, what's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I ever received is quite notably from my father, as no one would be surprised to hear, having heard all I've had to say about him so far. But he always raised me from a very young age to say, Rachel, everything you're doing now is to prepare you for a job that does not yet exist. What you are going to add to the world don't fit into the mold of what exists now. Because when you're ready to add value, you will be creating a unique proposition for yourself. So just train yourself on your passions, follow your heart, follow your instincts, work really, really hard. And then the value that you have to add to the world will create itself in opportunity, right? So don't mold yourself into the norm. That was all he said. The job you are going to have doesn't exist yet. So there you go.
Love it. And I wouldn't expect anything less from him. So
he's a wonderful man.
He really is. And her mother is absolutely spectacular, completely sublime.
She is.
So
I'm very blessed.
You really, really are. So with that, I can't top that. So with that, we say thank you to Rachel. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experiences, for being willing to be open and vulnerable about some of the not so pleasant experiences that you went through, and taking us on that journey about hard work and perseverance and being willing to see things differently and understanding that your superpower is in your difference, not in trying to assimilate with everybody else. So I hope that you do that and unlock your own superpower. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. I look forward to seeing you again. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and like and comment on the video. Tell us what else you want to learn about, what else you want to hear about, who else you want to hear from. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.